the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Lightcast. We are your hosts, JP Bedell and Megan Mazzocco. How are you, Megan?
Hi, JP. I'm fine. How are you this afternoon?
Yeah, we're making it happen. I'm well. On today's show, we have Nathan Stodola of Delos and the Well Building Standard. We're going to be talking about what the Well Building Standard is, how it relates to sustainability, and of course how lighting plays a role in it. Nathan, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm well. I'm really well. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I became interested in the Well Building Standard probably about a year ago. I met with some of the folks at Delos and learned about what the goal is, did some reading on it, and I'm fascinated by how it relates to other sustainability efforts, how it partners with them. So just for folks that aren't aware of it, what it is, can you give us a sort of high level on what the Well Building Standard is and how you think about it working with other systems?
Yeah, the Well Building Standard is the first building standard that focuses exclusively on the health of the people in the building and their overall wellness. And it's a performance-based system for measuring and certifying features that are part of the built environment. So what I mean there is that in addition to documents that are submitted to show that certain design features have been met, this involves an on-site visit by a well assessor who will be there taking air quality measurements and other sort of performance metrics to make sure that the building is performing as designed and in a way that is healthy for its occupants. And the concept is made up of the Well Building Standard is made up of 7 concepts or categories: air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, and mind. And it's been a process that started about 7 years ago with a lot of research and development and 3-phase peer review with scientific experts that are just understanding a lot of the important mechanisms, medical experts who see the effects of some of the bad quality buildings or bad quality outdoor air and are always interested in interventions that can improve the health of their patients, and then a practitioner's review to ensure that all of the things that were written in the standard are actually implementable in buildings. And it was publicly launched in October 2014, and it's administered and advanced by the International Well Building Institute, and I'm the vice president of the product development team within that organization. And we're working with GBCI, who is our third-party certifier. So we're the ones responsible for creating the standard, but they will go and look at a particular building and evaluate it against our standard and determine whether or not it passes. And if it does pass, what would it be its designation, whether it's silver, gold, or platinum level. And they're the same agency that performs the certification process for LEED as well. In fact, we're working to be collaborative with a number of LEED standards out there. And that's why we are looking at the health of the people inside and what sort of things are affecting them rather than any sort of global concerns, because we want projects to be choosing well plus local building standards like LEED or BREEAM or Green Star.
Gotcha. Okay. So if we're talking about how this works on a practical level, what are some of the things that specifiers need to do to start to understand how to go after this, what the value add is for their clients? And because I think LEED there was a ramp-up time in terms of getting people to understand. Ultimately, they understood the goal of it, right? The goal was to save energy, to make the building more environmentally friendly. How does specifiers start to wrap their minds around implementing well and start to think about how to use the standard?
There is some amount of overlap with the LEED program already and with other green ones. For instance, a lot of the material safety credits that you see in LEED, we are using something that's extremely similar to that. And other times that we're going to have similar credits, but towards different intents. So the LEED buildings have credits towards promoting stair use over elevators because that reduces electricity consumption. And we have those same credits and for proximity to transit and walkability and bikes, but that's because we want to get people more active and healthy in that way. So some of the standard is going to look very familiar to a lot of people that are working with LEED. And in fact, the idea of it being a standard at all, LEED has laid the groundwork that people know there's some building excellence standard out there. So they see this not as some brand new thing that they are going to have a really high learning curve, but merely a new implementation of something they're already familiar with. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to finally add that in terms of the value add, that we are targeting the occupants of the building, which is going to be, in a commercial sense, the largest expenses that the building is going to be operating. That if they are looking at energy or even their mortgage or their lease, the salaries of the people there are 10 times what they're paying in rent and 100 times what they're paying in energy. So some tiny increase in productivity or decrease in sick days is going to easily overtake any monetary savings from many of the other costs that buildings might face.
Mm-hmm. I've heard the standard referred to as kind of a connective tissue that's kind of connecting the dots between the energy equation and the indoor quality equation, and then the human facet of everything. So I think that's an absolutely totally valid point. Is the human resource is the most valuable one in any organization or building.
Yes, and that we try not to put in anything in the standard that is going to conflict with one of the green building standards like LEED, because we know that people pursuing LEED, there are a lot of our same customers as well.
Right.
Megan, you have another one, or?
I do have a bunch of questions, but I have more specific ones towards lighting. So if you have more general questions, let's go ahead and...
Well, I'll start with the high level, which is just sort of broadly speaking, how does lighting play into the standard? I know it's one of the key subcategories, but what's sort of, if you can give us a brief explainer on sort of at a high level, and then we'll drill into some of the more specific things.
Sure. The well building standard in its entirety is structured through a system of preconditions and optimizations. So about 40% of the standard are preconditions. So failing a single feature of there is going to bar a building from becoming certified. Then the optimizations are used for achieving higher levels of certification like gold and platinum. And within the preconditions within light, there are three things that we are looking towards. The light for visual acuity, light for non-visual effects on it, and then avoiding glare. And then the rest of the light sections is aimed towards essentially almost hints towards ways of meeting the original one. So that we have optimization features on promoting the use of daylight, or automated window shades, or a high light reflectance value on the walls, because all of those things will work towards reducing the glare that people might be experiencing, or increasing the amount of light that is going to be getting to the people's eye, so that it can have a direct alerting effect on them, as well as help maintain a healthy circadian rhythm.
I noticed that in the well building standards that light is number 4. So it's kind of this proverbial middle child. And I don't know if this is a question more for you or JP, but I know a lot of these lighting recommendations and these standards do exist in other places. But do you think that now lighting might get a little bit more attention now that it also has the exposure that it has within the well building standard?
I think so. I was actually just on a panel at Greenbuild with an architect and with a lighting biologist, and the architect was describing this project in Southeast Asia where they wanted to do this big indoor greenhouse that, so they had this enormous like superstructure of a bubble that had all these steel frames on it and these adjustable shades that would go and open up but then close to make sure it didn't overheat, and a big system in place there. And he was saying it's kind of funny that they're willing to put in all these millions and millions of dollars towards this, and this is just for the plants there, and not looking at really the people at all. And then the lighting biologist was noting that, well, that's because people have known for thousands of years that without light, plants will die, that you have to include light in whenever you're dealing with plants. And within the mine section of the well building standard, we have sections about biophilia and including indoor plants. So that's something that people pursuing well will fully understand. But the biologist then went on to say that somehow it's become an option, a luxury to include appropriate levels of light for people, whereas in the future we're going to be realizing that people are more like plants, that this is something that has to be considered from the beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was noticing that circadian is the second quality on this lighting requirements list, and for me, in my opinion, that's possibly the most important part of the requirements, because I've heard that people and society are kind of walking around in this permanent state of jet lag because we aren't getting the right visual light cues to really promote healthy sleep.
So
yeah, it's certainly. Go ahead.
No, I was going to piggyback on Megan's question and just ask, the science on artificial light and circadian rhythm seems to be in a state of flux right now. It was something that I think was studied pretty heavily in the 80s, then kind of got away from everybody, and then when Clinton was president and there was a review of hospitals and hospital accidents and lighting, there was another review of it, and it sort of seemed to go away again. Now we seem to be going through another wave of this research. How does I imagine the answer to this is yes, but how does well adapt to new science as science for something like circadian rhythm and artificial light develops?
So this is a very new field, and much of the well building standard is locating existing recommendations or guidelines or standards. For instance, for air quality, a lot of the numbers that we come from are either recommended from the World Health Organization or the EPA through its National Ambient Air Quality Standard. But with light, we found that there was not a lot of published standards out there, are ways to look at the non-visual effects of light, the circadian effects, the direct alerting effects. And that's because it's only been in the last 15 years or so that we've really become to understand the mechanism. And that was that they discovered as they termed it, novel photoreceptor, that these cells they've been noticing in the eyes for a long time are actually intrinsically photosensitive. So they're the IPRGCs. And that these are the dominant driver for a lot of the non-visual effects of light. And this includes things like circadian alignment, the direct alerting effects, and even aspects of vision, such as pupil constriction, are influenced, at least in part, by some of these cells. So the well-building standard is looking at these because there is not a metric for that is universally accepted. For the last 100 or more years, we've been talking about lumens and candela and all of these measures of electromagnetic power weighted to the visual system, but in terms of our circadian system, our non-visual system, there's aren't as many standards. In 2013, Robert Lucas and a number of different biologists published a paper in Trends in Neuroscience called Measuring Light in the Melanopsin Age, and it basically proposed a metric that we can do this in the same way as we talk about lux weighted to brightness. They talked about the equivalent melonopic lux, the lux weighted to the response of melanopsin, and that is the way that we use it in the well building standard.
Mm-hmm.
And we
I
are,
know that.
yeah, and we are working with existing standards as well. So, for instance, one of the important things on this idea of the non-visual effects is that we don't really care what light gets on the table. The architects are used to designing so many lux at 30 inches above the finished floor, but our eyes are not that sheet of paper on the table. Our eyes are our eyes, so we want to determine the amount of light that is hitting the vertical plane where the people are sitting. And fortunately, like, the Illuminating Engineering Society puts forward recommendations for typical light levels on the vertical plane as well. And so one of the ways to meet our circadian lighting feature is to use those, but to simultaneously use lights that have a high blue component in them, in their whiteness. So not a warm white light, but more of a cool white light that's going to have a lot of blue, and that's going to make those IPRGCs be activated while still maintaining the same level of brightness. Or we're creating flexibility for designers so that if they really, really want a warm white color and they think that their clients aren't going to go any other way, they have the option of maintaining that. They just would need to provide more light in order to meet the same levels in our standard.
Right. So the balancing act, to me, when I read the standard and when I sort of thought about this, is the balance between the visual effects of light and the things that clients are going to respond to on a day-to-day basis, like when they go in and see a room, versus what I think the science is telling us. Specifically, when it comes to color temperature, there's a difference between my how do I say this correctly? My fear about this is that we're going to talk about it in terms of color temperature when we talk about more blue in the light source, when it's really a matter of spectral distribution. And those are kind of two different things. And I think it's important that specifiers understand that. Now, lighting designers are going to get it, and this is just another argument for projects bringing in lighting designers who can act as consultants and help suss this stuff out. But it's important to understand that the spectrum of light that a source gives out is not the same thing as its color temperature. You can have something that is closer to a full spectrum source where there is blue included in that white light, even if it reads as sort of a warmer color temperature, like a 3,000 Kelvin versus a 5,000 Kelvin.
Exactly, and I ran the numbers on like a 4,000K LED and a different 4,000K fluorescent source, and found there was about a 60% difference in the relative amount of the IPRGC stimulus between the two, even though they would be the same color temperature. In a general sense, higher color temperatures will be more blue, but in the appendix of the well building standard, we give the full charts so that designers can put in the spectral power and to calculate that themselves, and we encourage all projects to do it that way.
So that kind of piggybacks to the next thing I wanted to talk about was, is there an effort to partner with lighting manufacturers to I don't know if this is possible or not. I'm sure you guys have thought about this, but you're the guy to ask. Partner with lighting manufacturers to create sort of a stamp that you can put on your cut sheet that says this is a well-certified fixture, or is that not the direction you guys want to go in?
That isn't the direction that we're going in, because we're working with buildings and large-scale things rather than products themselves, and also because manufacturers are loath to see this other stamp that they have to go and work towards and go through another product. And also, we want there to be flexibility, that a lot of the numbers that are out there might already dictate whether something is good or not, and the rest of it is just the use case. So that from a visual perspective, high color rendering index is great, so and that number is on there already. And in terms of the putting on a stamp for something being circadian smart or whatever, that it's not necessarily appropriate, because you could just use a different number of lamps. You could say that it's really important that I have 4000K here, and I understand that, but I'm going to work with these others. Instead, what manufacturers are realizing is that a lot of the highly technical information on their lamps they've been collecting for years is now relevant to their customers. For instance, the light source's spectral power distribution, or there are 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 color ones, that they have all that information on it, and that it just wasn't generally published out there. But if you call them up, a lot of them are happy to give it, and they're finding that it's being used to help determine their light's effects on the body's non-visual system in a way traditional metrics like lumens and CRI can't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another part of the toolkit. Sorry, go ahead.
And manufacturers are also helping just by the versatility of sources that are out there. The explosion of sophisticated solid-state lights and controls has made creating a circadian smart space of building a room easier than ever before. Just 5 years ago, color tunable systems were either somewhat experimental, not part of any core product line, or this decorative fixture used in ballrooms that could produce low-quality white light as best, but generally it would be like a blue highlight. Today, there's half a dozen companies with wireless consumer and architectural grade systems that can work with existing fixtures.
I was noticing about that idea of right to light that is in the lighting recommendations for the well building standards. And at first I was like, what does that mean? But I read that it's about getting more light into the core spaces and all of the occupied spaces of the building. And this is kind of a general trend, I think, that we're seeing in office and workplaces is the democratization of the workplace. And in response to what you were saying about, all the magnitude of tools and controls and nice LED, tunable light sources. The controls are traditionally in the hands of the building owners or the building operators. But if you have heard, they recently released at The Verge the system called Plus Comfy. It's a software produced by Building Robotics that gives users the ability on their mobile device in an application to vote whether they are too warm or too cool. That was the original iteration of that software. Now they've invited partners like Redwood Systems and View Dynamic Glass and Lutron to the table to give building occupants even more control over comfort, because comfort doesn't just stop at hot or cool. It also involves everything that's on the well building standard lighting guidelines: glare, electric glare, solar glare, and glare at your workstation. And so I thought this was a really neat tool to mention, this Plus Comfy, because users can activate blinds if there is too much glare, or they may deploy the View Dynamic Glass to tint based on what the position of the sun or whatever activity is going on in the space. So I just thought that would be an interesting tidbit to throw in there about a specific item that you had mentioned in general.
And within the well building standard, one of the preconditions is that there is some sort of mechanisms on all of the windows to avoid the solar glare that would come in. But one of the optimizations is putting in a way to automate it, which is becoming more and more important. And a lot of like mechanical shades or electrochromic glass, they will all integrate it into it. It's becoming less and less expensive, and it's really important. Another presentation I heard at Greenbuild, this person was presenting about the study they did where all the employees were wearing these little light sensors on them all day long, and then they would go and eventually find out how much light each of them was receiving. And not surprisingly, they found that the people that were furthest into the building core were getting the least amount of light compared to the ones on the outside. But what was interesting was they found that the people that got the highest amount of light were the people that were on north-facing windows. And this is a building in the United States, so we're not in the southern hemisphere.
Right.
And that is because all of the buildings had non-automated glass. So there would be lots of light coming in the south or the east or the west side at some portion of the day, and people would pull down the blinds, and then they would never get opened again for the next 6 months. So they were finding that with the north sky, without its sun that's coming through, people would be getting more light there than the rest because they were not taking care to operate the blinds. So by putting it in a way to automate it, then it makes it even easier for the project space to get high amounts of appropriate levels of light without getting too much. To use, I think, the lead terms that are out there, getting a high amount of spatial daylight autonomy without too high of an annual sun exposure.
Right. That's fascinating. I want one of those light sensors. There's probably an app for that.
Right.
Talk to me. There we go. So, talk to me about if you're a practitioner, if you're an art, our audience is a lot of lighting designers, lighting folks. But if you're an architect, a lighting designer, what's the best and smartest way to start to wrap your mind around the standard and how to start thinking about? I guess to your earlier point, architects and lighting designers are used to talking about IES standards. They're used to talking about horizontal foot candles, lumens and lux, things like that. This seems to me like a continuation of that kind of thought process. So it's thinking about vertical foot candles. It's thinking about angle of incidence on the light. What other things or other metrics would you recommend that lighting designers or specifiers look at from their manufacturers if they're putting a project together?
As you mentioned, a lot in the well building standard is traditional metrics that are used already, whether it's for sunlight, the different numbers used by LEED, whether it is the lumens for the visual lighting. And the real thing that is just new is the idea of the equivalent Melonopic lux. And the thing that I would say for the lighting designers is just remember this is looking at light as a ray, light as a series of coming out of fixtures, but it is just weighted to a different sensitivity. So each fixture, each source rather, and whether it's sunlight or whether it is an incandescent light or 4000K or another type of 4000K source, as you mentioned, it is going to have essentially some ratio that goes that relates the amount that the light will impact or set off the visual system and our non-visual system. So there was a worksheet that you can calculate a Melonopic ratio, and that basically means that if you find, like with one of the 4000K sources I mentioned, the ratio is 0.76. That means that every 1 lux you're designing for, that is like 3/4 of a lux for the circadian system. So it's not a whole bunch of new geometry and crazy things like that. It's just these little simple arithmetical adjustments to all of the terms that they're used to already.
My recommendation, and this is just my, and you don't want to work directly with manufacturers, but giving a training or putting out materials for manufacturers so that they can calculate that and drop it into their cut sheets would make the specifiers' lives easier, because
Absolutely.
specifiers are used to, if they can drop that Melonopic lux number right onto their cut sheet so that it's one less thing the designer's got to calculate and look up, eventually, my hope is that this kind of a metric gets dropped into the IES file, and it just gets calculated with the rest of the job, because that would be super easy. So the I was going to circle back to an idea about glare avoidance, and sort of glare avoidance and how it's. Well, you mentioned in your opening that you have a third-party GBCI comes in and evaluates the space and certifies the space under your criteria. How are things like glare and other? I mean, like, is this a site visit that determines this, or is this based on the drawing paperwork?
Yes, it's absolutely, there's a site visit. So about a quarter of the standard, or a little bit more, is verified entirely on site. So whether this is some metric like a water sample that's taken and sent to a lab for analysis, or an acoustic test, or air quality, or it could be just a visual inspection. It could be the assessor checking to make sure that there's enough no smoking signs around. So about a quarter is verified solely on site. Then there's a the rest has documentation, though a lot of that is subject to a spot check, that when the assessors are on site, they can just scan around and make sure that everything looks okay, even if it's been attested to already. And the documentation that's provided is a combination of letters of assurance, which is basically one member of the project team saying, yes, this is the way it was designed, and annotated documents. And the reason we're comfortable with these letters of assurance is because we ultimately have the performance test that's coming, so that we'll be able to check to see that everything really is mostly okay, and then the letters of assurance are one more step towards that. And then the annotated documents could be things like architectural drawings, but oftentimes they're actually policy documents. So the well building standard is more than just what is physically put in the building. It's also something how it operates and how the organization that is there operates. So there are requirements that are going to affect the maintenance schedule. So we're going to want to see that the janitorial and the custodial staff and mechanical staff are tasked with regularly maintaining things or cleaning things in certain ways, and even the HR policy, so that there is a policy in place for parental leave, or that there is some sort of program in place for integrative design when creating the system in the first place. And a lot of these might be optimizations, but it's ways that projects can really show that they care about the people, because these are things that affect the people themselves, and work towards higher levels of achievement.
Mm-hmm. I did want to ask one item that I heard might be going into the well building standard under the lighting portion, but I didn't see it in here, and that was about avoidance of electromagnetic frequencies. And I think that might go back to your original answer of there's just a limited body of research right now on those findings, and as that research becomes more prevalent, and they might, I'm guessing they might be able to integrate more of those recommendations, or is that something that's in there that I just missed?
No. So yeah, electromagnetic fields are not part of the standard. I mean, light is an electromagnetic wave, so by saying we're weighting it to the visual system, weighting it to the IPRGCs, in some sense we are controlling, or really mandating a minimum amount of electromagnetic radiation in the space. But in terms of like milligauss or Tesla or volts per meter, we aren't looking at that in the standard. We did do a lot of background research and have some documents on that, and we're working with some of the authors of the IARC reports on EMF, and then based on all of their input, we decided that putting in a limit that was different than all of the limits already in place, or that levels commonly found, was not warranted.
Right, right.
So one other question for you guys, or for you, or one of for me anyway. The updating of the standard. So when the USGBC goes through a lead update, there's sort of a procedure in place for how that happens, and there's versioning and comment sections, and how's that going to work for you guys? How's well going to get updated over time? Is it going to be a complete revision like LEED does, or is it going to be sort of section by section as science improves?
I think that it's going to be a combination of the two. I think that when, as science improves, as certain things are found, as they affect individual sections, then those will be updated, but there may be major overhauls to the structure of the standard, the way features are laid out, for instance, or certification operates as well, and that would be a wholesale update. And as we go forward, we're formalizing the process for all of this and putting in ways that the community will be getting involved in an open and collaborative way.
Okay, fantastic. Megan, what else do you have for us?
How long or intensive is the study before I can take the WELL AP certification exam?
The WELL AP credential, the exam is live now, so you can sign up for it. There's information on our webpage, wellcertified.com. It's operated through Prometric, which is the same testing company that runs the LEED AP and numerous other tests. It was developed with GBCI, who created the LEED AP credential, and there's more information in the candidate handbook that describes what the source material is there and how to study for it.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic. Megan, Lighting Vitals. Let's talk about them. And Nathan, if you want to stick around for this, this is where we talk about industry news. If you're out of time, though, I understand.
I am. I'd love to go, but if you do have a checklist or a bulleted list of really neat things you talk about, I would happily read it afterwards.
All right, very good. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Everything that you need to know about the Well Building Standard is at wellcertified.com. I suggest you go read up on it, and come back with questions. We'd love to have Nathan back on the show and talk about it more in depth. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Nathan.
All right, Megan, it's time for Lighting Vitals. We mentioned it during the show, but let's talk about what is news in the industry this month.
I got a message that HLV Lighting Design is moving.
They are moving to a new office here in New York. They're still in New York, not moving out of town, but they are moving. So they've got a couple of, I think they're going offline for a couple of days. The one piece of news that I wanted to share with everyone going into the end of the year is we are seeing just the back end of this TM3015 conversation. I'll finish it up. So I don't even know if this is news as much as it's just the sort of taking the temperature of what the industry reaction has been. Mm-hmm. Thus far, specifiers are not going crazy over this as a standard. It's still going to have some time before it's going to unleash as a new metric, I think, because the manufacturers haven't bought in yet. We'll see what happens when it comes to California and getting this written into law and what's going to be required. But at this point, after all of our conversations about it, it doesn't seem like it's taken off just yet. But sometimes you got to be ahead of the curve, right?
Absolutely, and really, any new standard or new specification in the architectural industry generally takes about 10 years. Is the adoption time? So I think it's a little early.
Right. Well, I'm impatient. And LED is moving a lot faster than that. So.
Absolutely.
All right, Megan, thank you for doing another show with us. Guys, thank you for tuning in. When this comes out, it will probably be post-holidays, maybe pre-holidays, but whatever holiday you celebrate, enjoy it. And we'll be back in the new year to talk about some more stuff.
Well, Happy New Year. It will be wonderful to be talking about lighting again in 2016.
All right. Thanks very much, Megan. This was another edition of Lightcast, produced in partnership with AV Nation, and thanks for tuning in.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.